With the exception of the political scene, which is, abysmal like always, 2026 has been a fantastic year for the United States. I mean, we won the gold medal in hockey in the 2026 Olympics for the first time since the original 1980 Miracle on Ice. We have excellent America 250 themed coins to celebrate the history of the founding of the United States. But arguably the biggest accomplishment America and Canada achieved this year was the successful launch of the Artemis 2 mission around the moon. Like many people last month, I was watching the launch live, and I was terrified at first because I was so worried that it'd be a repeat of the Challenger disaster. But when those boosters separated successfully and the mission kept going, yeah, I was excited to say the least. Even after the launch, I kept obsessively checking the headlines every single day following the launch, following every update I could find. And when the Artemis 2 astronauts finally began their return to Earth 9 days after the launch, I started getting nervous all over again. As the capsule descended into the Pacific Ocean, part of me was convinced something was going to go wrong. And thankfully, I was wrong once again. We're going to see the Artemis 2 mission entering the atmosphere. Here it comes! Oh, here it comes. They're coming in the atmosphere. But I think I thought I just saw the fire. Oh man, look at that. Yeah, there's the blackout because they're on fire.
Predicted, we've entered our communications blackout. This will be a 6-minute blackout period. No voice, no data from the crew.
I just hope they survive.
We're 30 seconds away from the anticipated point of peak heating on the vehicle, where temperatures will rise to about 4,000 to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
That stupid blurry camera. Man, what an April Fool's Day that was. That stupid camera.
Until the end of the blackout period.
This camera looks like straight out of the 80s. They're in the atmosphere. Wow, look, there it is. Oh, that's just a crummy old animation. Oh, what a jip. They're 37 miles from Earth. Well, no, they just lost communication with
Base, the final frontier.
Dude, there it is! He's alive! They're back! Yes! Yes, this isn't a Challenger! Woohoo! That's the rocket. It's a ball of fire. It's coming back in the atmosphere. Yeah, I'm filling the whole thing. It's awesome. Look, there's the sky. There's the clouds moving. Man, I wish I could be an astronaut. That'd be so cool.
And there go the first series of parachutes.
Free falling! Look, there's the ocean. The second round of parachutes. They pulled a John Glenn, but better. Oh, this is excellent. Seeing America dominating space travel again, it almost brings a tear to my eye. But they're about to get captured. Taken. By the boat, Uh-oh. That doesn't look good. Boom! They made it! Woohoo! After the crew safely splashed down, I started wondering something. I can't possibly be the only person who felt this way watching this mission, which got me thinking about the full history of space travel, and how it went from something Americans feared in the 1950s to a defining symbol of optimism in the 1960s. Today we'll be talking about the full story of the space race and its impact on the Cold War, science, and history as a whole. It sounds like a lot of hoopla! Sounds like a lot of hoopla! Sounds like a hoopla! Hoopla! Sounds like a lot of hoopla to make over an irrelevant waste of money, right? Prelude to the space race. Before humanity could ever dream of walking on the moon, the technology that made spaceflight possible was born out of war. Prior to World War II, German, American, and Soviet scientists have all experimented with early liquid-fueled rockets. But reaching outer space required far more powerful ballistic missile technology. That breakthrough came largely through the work of von Braun and Nazi Germany's Aggregate 4 rocket, better known as the V-2, which was a terrifying weapon that was used to bombard Allied cities during the war. After Germany's defeat in 1945, both the United States and the Soviet Union rushed to seize German rocket scientists, equipment, and research documents in order to jumpstart their own missile programs. What had once been a weapon of war soon became the foundation of the space race in the 50s and 60s. Public fascination with the idea of space travel began to grow during the early 1950s. In October 1951, Soviet rocket engineer
Mikhail Tikhonravov
published an article called Flight to the Moon in a Soviet youth newspaper, where he described a future spacecraft capable of carrying humans beyond Earth. He confidently predicted that the dreams of pioneering Russian space theorist Konstantin Tsiolkovsky could become reality within just a couple of decades. Meanwhile, in the United States, popular media also began fueling public excitement about space exploration. Between 1952 and 1954, Collier's magazine released a series titled Man Will Conquer Space Soon, which showed ambitious concepts for human spaceflight designed by von Braun himself. Then in 1955, the Walt Disney Company aired the television special Man in Space on Disneyland, introducing millions of Americans to the possibility of rockets, satellites, and moon missions.
Flight poses two problems. The first is, of course, to build a rocket ship. The second, and no less important, is to prepare and train the men who are to fly the future rocket ships and to provide suitable working conditions that will enable them to survive in space. To help show you what is being done to solve these problems, we have called upon one of the foremost exponents of space travel, Dr. Wernher von Braun, who is at present the chief of the Guided Missile Division of the Army's Rocket Center at Redstone Arsenal. He was also overall director of the development of the original V-2 rocket.
Now here's a model of my design for a four-stage orbital rocket ship. Compared to the unmanned instrument rocket, it is quite large, but the overall size and weight of the rocket is mainly determined by the 11 tons weight of this top section. This weight dictates the amount of fuel and the numbers of motors needed to produce enough power to equalize the gravitational pull of the Earth. The payload in the top section will consist of 10 crew members plus equipment. Notice the wings, small rocket motor, and landing gears. This is a section that must ultimately return the men to the Earth safely. To produce the energy needed to hurl this stage into the orbit, we need these three additional rocket-powered sections. Here we have a cutaway drawing of our rocket showing the location of the fuel and the motors of each section. The first stage carries 1,060 tons of fuel, and its 29 motors will lift the entire weight of the ship vertically off the ground. The second stage has 8 motors and carries 155 tons of fuel. It will be dropped when its speed has reached 14,300 miles per hour. The next is our third stage, with only 1 rocket motor and 13 tons of fuel. The third stage gives the passenger section the final kick to attain the orbit. It will not be separated from the passenger section until just before the return flight. The third stage will be left in space, and a very small motor in the winged fourth stage will return the ship to the atmosphere so it can glide back to the base.
The program attracted an audience of roughly 40 million viewers and helped transform space travel from science fiction into something people could genuinely believe could happen within their lifetimes. From 1955 through 1960, the space race rapidly accelerated. During those few years, both the United States and the Soviet Union successfully launched the world's first artificial satellites, set animals into orbit, and carried out robotic missions to the moon. What had once seemed impossible was quickly becoming reality. By 1955, both superpowers possessed ballistic missiles powerful enough to send objects into space, setting the stage for a fierce technological rivalry tied directly to Cold War nationalism. On July 29, 1955, President Dwight D. Eisenhower announced that the United States intended to place satellites into Earth orbit as part of the upcoming International Geophysical Year. Just days later, Soviet officials publicly declared that they planned to do the same. Behind the scenes, however, the Soviet Union operated under intense secrecy. Soviet chief rocket designer Sergei Korolev successfully persuaded Soviet leadership to prioritize launching a satellite before the Americans. From that point onward, the Soviet government treated nearly every aspect of its space program as classified information. Launches were often kept secret until after they succeeded. Failures were hidden from the public. Outside observers knew almost nothing about the true size, design, or capabilities of Soviet spacecraft and rockets. Soviet newspapers rarely acknowledged disasters or technical problems, creating the illusion that the USSR's space program was nearly flawless. Meanwhile, the US was faced its own political concerns by entering space. President Eisenhower worried that launching satellites over foreign nations could be interpreted as violating national airspace and potentially spark an international crisis. His administration argued that outer space should be beyond the Kármán line, meaning satellites orbiting above that altitude should not legally count as trespassing. Eisenhower also feared appearing overly aggressive by relying on military rockets for space launches, since doing so can make the United States look like a warmongering superpower. Because of this, he chose the Navy's experimental Vanguard rocket program instead of allowing von Braun's military-connected Jupiter-C rocket to carry America's first satellite into orbit. Ironically, von Braun's team had already demonstrated that the Jupiter-C was capable of reaching orbit during a 1956 test flight, but the launch was officially classified only as a suborbital military experiment rather than a true satellite mission. When Sergei Korolev learned about Werner von Braun's 1956 Jupiter-C launch test, he mistakenly believed that the Americans have actually attempted to place a satellite into orbit and failed. In true Cold War fashion, this immediately sent the Soviets into oh crap, we need to move faster mode of thinking. As a result, Korolev aggressively accelerated Soviet plans to launch their own satellite before the United States could recover and try again. Fortunately for him, the Soviet Union possessed a massive advantage, the massive R-7 rockets, which was significantly more powerful than any American launch vehicle available at the time. Korolev originally intended for the Soviets' first satellite to be an advanced scientific spacecraft known as Object D. Object D was incredibly ambitious in the 1950s. The satellite would weigh roughly 1,400 kilograms, making it dramatically larger than any tiny American satellite concepts being proposed at the time. Around 300 kilograms of that weight would consist of scientific instruments designed to photograph Earth, measure radiation levels, and study the planet's magnetic field. But there was just one tiny little problem. The thing kept running into nothing but delays. Korolev realized that the Soviet Union risked losing the race entirely if they waited for the larger satellite to be completed. So in February of that year, he successfully convinced Soviet leadership to approve of a backup plan, a much simpler satellite called Sputnik. Unlike the enormous and highly sophisticated Object D, the new Sputnik design was small, lightweight, and far less complicated. The spacecraft was essentially a polished metallic sphere around 54 centimeters in diameter and weighing only around 84 kilograms. Despite its simpler design, Sputnik still carried several important systems. It contained 2 radio transmitters broadcasting on different shortwave frequencies, allowing people around the world to hear the now famous beep 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 signal from space.
You are hearing the actual signals transmitted by the Earth-circling satellite, one of the great scientific feats of the age.
It also included instruments capable of detecting whether tiny meteoroids punctured the satellite's hull and equipment, designed to study the density of Earth's upper atmosphere, specifically the thermosphere. So while Sputnik may have looked like a shiny metal beach ball with an antenna sticking out of it, it was still an important scientific achievement, and within a few months, that little sphere would completely shock the world and trigger one of the most intense technological rivalries in modern history, the West's response to Sputnik. The launch of Sputnik 1 set off what would later become known as the Sputnik Crisis in the United States.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Instantly reshaping national priorities and kicking off a serious push to regain the upper hand in technological leadership over the Soviet Union. It also became one of the major catalysts for America's long-term goal of landing humans on the moon.
Ocean man, take me by the hand, lead me to the land that you understand.
American reactions at the time were all over the place. Some officials treated it like it was an existential emergency, while others basically said, it's just a metal ball of junk, calm the hell down. Republican Congressman and later President Gerald Ford of Michigan captured the anxiety side of the debate when he warned that Americans couldn't afford to think in isolationist terms anymore. His argument was that once nuclear weapons could be launched from space at extreme speeds, geography basically stopped mattering. On the more dismissive end of the spectrum, former U.S. Rear Admiral Rawson Bennett downplayed Sputnik as nothing more than a hunk of iron almost anybody could launch. In other words, depending on who you asked, Sputnik was either a harmless science experiment or the opening scene of a Terminator film. Beyond the political panic, the Sputnik crisis completely transformed American science and research policies, laying the foundation for much of the modern U.S. academic research system. Funding that had previously come mostly from private donors and small institutional grants suddenly shifted into massive federal investment almost overnight. 5 days after the Soviet Union successfully placed Sputnik 1 into orbit, the first human-made object to circle Earth, the United States was still processing what the hell happened, and President Eisenhower publicly addressed the growing questions about whether this meant America was suddenly in danger.
As to the Soviet satellite, we congratulate Soviet scientists upon putting a satellite into orbit.
President Smith of the United Press, Russia has launched an Earth satellite. They also claim to have had a successful firing of the intercontinental ballistics missile, none of which this country's done. I ask you, sir, what are we going to do about it?
Well, let's take first the Earth satellite as opposed to the missile, because they're related only indirectly in the physical sense, and in our case, not at all. For the government, the National Science Foundation was made the monitor of the work for the simple reason that from the beginning, the whole American purpose and design in this effort has been to produce the maximum in scientific information. The project was sold to me on this basis. My question was, what does mankind hope to learn? And the answer of the scientists was, we don't exactly know. And that's the reason we want to do it. But we do hope to learn lots of things about outer space that will be valuable to the scientific world. They did mention such things as temperatures, radiation, ionization, pressures. I believe residual pressures from such air as would be at the altitude where successful orbiting was possible. That's the kind of information the scientists were looking for and which they hoped to obtain from this project. Now, in the first instance, they thought they would merely put up a satellite. And very quickly they found they could put up, or they thought they could put up a satellite with a considerable instrumentation to get, even during the geophysical year, the kind of information to which I've just referred. They expressed themselves as pleased rather than chagrined, because at least Soviets have proved the first part of it, that this thing will successfully orbit, but there are a lot of other things in the scientific inquiry that are not yet answered and which we are pushing ahead to answer.
When asked directly about security risks, Eisenhower essentially shrugged off the panic, saying that Sputnik did not concern him one iota. In other words, yes, the Soviets just beat us into space, but it's not like the satellite's gonna drop bombs on us anytime soon. His argument was that Sputnik was fundamentally a scientific milestone, not a weapon, which he was 100% correct. But by 1958, Eisenhower laid out what he called the three stark facts the United States could not ignore anymore. First, the Soviet Union had overtaken the United States and much of the Western world in key areas of space-related science and technology. Second, if that lead continued, the USSR could turn the scientific prestige into political influence, weakening America's global standing. And third, and most seriously, if Soviet advances in space translated into superior military capabilities, it could eventually create a real strategic threat to the United States and the West. However, Eisenhower's ability to calm public fears was limited. Much of what he knew about Soviet capabilities came from classified intelligence, meaning that he had confidence in information that the public didn't have access to. That gap made reassurance difficult, and Sputnik's launch ended up shaking public confidence in American technological leadership.
Well, sir, what do you think about this achievement of the Russians?
I think it's a remarkable thing. My only regret is that we couldn't get there first.
It's frightening. We should find out what they're doing that we're not doing, and we should do something about it very quickly.
What do you think?
Well, I think Russia's accomplishments are greater than ours, and I'm not too disturbed about it, but I feel that the United States will succeed eventually in putting a man into space.
And you?
Well, I think that, Russia's getting into space really bothers me, because It's making the Cold War between the Russia and the United States, more intense. There's going to be more tension in world peace.
I doubt whether this was actually accomplished. The man seemed to be hidden for 2-3 days, and they could say anybody did in this situation. If they actually accomplished it, they would have announced it immediately.
Efforts to prioritize the Navy's Project Vanguard intensified, while renewed attention was given to the existing Explorer effort, which successfully placed the first American satellite in orbit on January 31st, 1958.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire command. Good exercise. Rocket exercise to the fire. Ignition. Lift off.
A month later, Eisenhower also authorized the creation of the Advanced Research Projects Agency, later known as DARPA, inside the Department of Defense to push cutting-edge military technology development. Then, on July 29th of that same year, he signed the National Aeronautics and Space Act, officially creating NASA, which would play a massive role in the space race going forward. The reaction didn't stop at space programs. Less than a year after Sputnik, Congress passed the National Defense Education Act, a massive investment aimed at strengthening American science and technical education. Politically, Sputnik also became a tool. Leaders used it to boost public approval, justify massive spending, and frame science and technology as a matter of national survival, while intelligence estimates often overstated Soviet capabilities, which intensified fears of a missile gap and pressured the Eisenhower administration into accelerating U.S. missile development just to reassure Congress and the public. By 1960, presidential candidate and Massachusetts Senator John F. Kennedy built part of his campaign around closing that perceived missile gap. However, while the American politicians were arguing over missile gaps, the Soviet Union's lead rocket engineer and inventor of Sputnik, Sergei Korolev, was preparing his next power move. What if we launched a human into space? And he succeeded on April 12 in 1961 when Yuri Gagarin, who was a part of the first human space flight in world history, completed a single orbit around the Earth, which turned him into an international hero almost overnight, and put America on the spot. The US, however, wasn't going down without a fight, as they launched their equivalent of the Vostok 1 a month later with the Mercury Redstone 3 mission. Despite formerly being called the Mercury Redstone 3, its pilot, Alan Shepard, named the capsule Freedom 7, which establishes a standard for the naming of their spacecraft and the structure of the names for the remaining 6 Mercury astronauts. Although Shepard's 15-minute suborbital flight was successful, however, the Soviet Union was not done that year, as they launched the Vostok 2 5 months later, so that way they could study the effects of an extended period of zero gravity. No, not that zero gravity. Gurman Titov, aboard the Vostok 2, set the record for most times a human orbited the Earth at a shocking 17 times. By this point, the Soviets were absolutely dominating the space race, and the US was looking like Sega by the end of the console wars. However, President John F. Kennedy was determined to restore American morale following the back-to-back losses to the Soviet Union. After becoming president, especially after the loss of Yuri Gagarin in 1961, Kennedy dramatically escalated American ambitions, famously committing the United States to landing a man on the moon in front of Congress in May of 1961. He argued that the control of space would be as strategically decisive in the 20th century as naval dominance had been in the earlier eras.
I believe we possess all the resources and talents necessary, but the facts of the matter are that we have never made the national decisions or marshaled the national resources required for such leadership. We have never specified long-range goals on an urgent time schedule or managed our resources and our time so as to ensure their fulfillment. I therefore ask the Congress, above and beyond the increases I have earlier requested for space activities, to provide the funds which are needed to meet the following national goals. First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
Former President Eisenhower, however, was not impressed by this idea and thought of it more as a publicity stunt rather than a practical necessity. Eisenhower wasn't the only one who disapproved of the moon idea, as public polling around that time surprisingly showed that 58% of Americans were surprisingly opposed to the idea. Kennedy had privately acknowledged that the space race was a waste of money, but he knew that there were benefits from a frightened electorate. However, Kennedy's mindset would completely change the following year. John Glenn, who was one of the Mercury 7, made history on February 20th aboard Friendship 7, becoming the first American to complete an orbital flight. After multiple delays, then the launch finally occurred at 2:47 with NASA engineer T.J. O'Malley given the go-ahead. And after liftoff, the Atlas rocket performed almost flawlessly. However, the mission wasn't smooth for long. A yaw thruster malfunction forced Glenn to switch between automatic and manual control, which became a reoccurring issue throughout his flight. A more serious warning, segment 51, suggested the heat shield might be loose, though it was later proven to be a faulty sensor. This led Mission Control to debate whether to keep the retro rocket pack attached during re-entry as a safety precaution. Fuel usage also became a concern because Glenn manually controlled the spacecraft for extended periods, consuming nearly 30% of his altitude control fuel by the second orbit. Despite this, he kept the capsule stable, joking with ground control during his third orbit and requesting flight pay credit for orbital hours. During re-entry, things intensified. The capsule hit extreme heating, the retro pack partially burnt and fell apart outside the window, and Glenn experienced violent oscillations, describing it as, quote, falling like a leaf. He had to rely on partial automated damping systems as fuel ran dangerously low. Finally, the heat shield and landing bag locked into place correctly after a manual confirmation, ending with a safe splashdown. Despite multiple system scares, fuel concerns, and a very fiery re-entry, Friendship 7 completed America's first orbital mission successfully, turning Glenn into an instant national hero and proving that the US could in fact stay in orbit without improvising disaster mid-flight. However, the United States wasn't the only Western country that ramped up its space ambitions after Sputnik. The United Kingdom soon entered the game with the Ariel 1 satellite, developed with help from NASA and launched in 1962, effectively made Britain the third nation ever to operate a satellite in space. But just 5 months later, Canada followed a similar path. Inspired in part by Sputnik's success, Canadian scientists later developed Alouette 1. Alouette 1 launched on September 29, 1962, and remarkably, it's still in orbit today, even though it was switched off just 10 years after its launch. And we're not even done discussing the West's space escapades in the year of 1962. Despite how impressive John Glenn's heroism was with the US orbiting around the Earth, President John F. Kennedy basically pulled a baking soda volcano and stole the show with his moon speech.
When I was young, I entered a science fair with my very first Innator. I wasn't very clever with names yet. It was just, Innator. Just as I was about to demonstrate my invention to the judges, a kid with a baking soda volcano stole the show.
Convinced that the United States needed a bold space achievement, clearly proved it was ahead of the Soviet Union, President Kennedy tasked Vice President LBJ, who chaired the National Aeronautics and Space Council, with figuring out what that goal should be. Kennedy specifically wanted options. Could America outdo the Soviets by building a space station first, sending a man around the moon, or actually landing on it? And just as important, how much each of these ideas would cost. Man, it's so weird actually seeing a politician actually fiscally conservative. Who would have thought? Anyway, Johnson brought the question up to NASA leadership. Agency's new administrator, James E. Webb, was blunt about the situation. Being the Soviets to a space station was essentially off the table, and even sending a man around the moon at first was uncertain. Well, until this year. The only realistic win big or go home option, in his view, was a lunar landing. But it came with a massive price tag, around $22 billion at the time, which is roughly $176 billion today. NASA expanded its spaceflight operations, transforming the Space Task Group into the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, Texas. And the land for the facility was donated through Rice University by Humble Oil and Refining Company in 1961. In September of 1962, Kennedy visited the new center during a 2-day tour. He was shown around by astronauts Scott Carpenter and John Glenn, viewed early models of the Gemini and Apollo spacecraft, and even saw the Friendship 7 capsule that Glenn had used for America's first orbital flight that I just talked about earlier. While there, Kennedy used the moment to deliver a speech meant to rally public support and reinforce the national commitment to the space program. President Kennedy spoke in front of over 40,000 people at Rice Stadium on September 12, 1962, in what would later become known as the "We shall go to the moon" speech. Sorry, I was trying to do like a Massachusetts accent like Kennedy, but I somehow ended up doing a Ross Perot impression instead.
There will be a giant sucking sound going south.
Kennedy's "We chose to go to the moon" speech effectively set the moon as the finish line for the space race against the Soviet Union, and the idea of space exploration went from something that sent people into panic mode following the launch of Sputnik to a new unexplored frontier that every country wanted to traverse.
Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
But for now, America's goal was to get to the moon. One of NASA's earliest and most important strategic choices was how to get the astronauts to the moon. Engineers debated three approaches: direct ascent, Earth orbit rendezvous, and lunar orbit rendezvous. The final decision came in July of 1962, when NASA Administrator James Webb announced that lunar orbit rendezvous would be the chosen method. This meant spacecraft would meet and dock in lunar orbit rather than travel as a single unit all the way down and back. The architecture defined the Apollo spacecraft system. It would consist of three main parts: a command module, which carried the astronauts and returned them safely to Earth; a service module, which provided propulsion, power, oxygen, and water; and a lunar module, which itself had two sections: a descent stage for landing on the moon and an ascent stage that launched the astronauts back into lunar orbit. This modular design made it possible for the entire mission to be launched on a single Saturn V rocket. Many of the technologies needed for Apollo were tested through Project Gemini, which helped develop critical spaceflight skills like the orbital rendezvous and docking. Progress was dramatically interrupted on July 27, 1967, when a cabin fire during a launch rehearsal, later known as Apollo 1, killed astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee.
The following audio recording and photograph were taken during the tragic Apollo 1 accident on January 27, 1967. The next 2 minutes contain real emergency audio from the moments the fire began and may be disturbing to some viewers, especially younger audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. This footage is included to honor the sacrifice and bravery of Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee, who gave their lives in the pursuit of space exploration and scientific progress. Thank you, Gus, Ed, and Roger, for your service to the United States and this world. Your bravery and dedication has inspired people across the world, and your sacrifice will never be forgotten.
Hey, how are we gonna get to the moon if we can't talk between three buildings? I can't hear a thing you're saying. Jesus Christ. Again? But how are we gonna get to the moon if we can't talk between two or three buildings?
The accident led to a full-on investigation and a complete redesign of key spacecraft systems. After the program resumed, Apollo 7 tested the command module in Earth orbit in October 1968. Apollo 8 followed in December, becoming the first mission to orbit the moon. In March of 1969, Apollo 9 tested the lunar module in Earth orbit. And in May, Apollo 10 conducted a full dress rehearsal in lunar orbit. And by July of 1969, all systems and procedures were in place for Apollo 11 to attempt the first ever moon landing. During this period, the United States gradually pulled ahead in the space race. In response, the Soviets attempted to achieve a different milestone, returning lunar material to Earth using unmanned probes. Just days before the Apollo 11 launched, the USSR sent Luna 15 into lunar orbit on July 13, 1969. It was intended to land on the moon and collect samples ahead of the American crew. However, during its descent, the probe malfunctioned and crashed into Mare Crisium, the moon missions. Apollo 11 drew an absolutely massive crowd before it left the ground. Roughly 1 million people packed the highways and beaches around Cape Canaveral just to watch the launch in person. Television broadcasts went live to 33 nations and reached an estimated 25 million viewers in the United States alone, while millions more followed along on the radio. President Richard Nixon watched from the White House with NASA liaison and Apollo astronaut Frank Borman.
20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
We got a roll program. Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading. Plus 30 seconds. Altitude's 2 miles. Oh, 11 Houston, you're good at 1 minute. Downrange 1 mile, altitude 4 miles now. Velocity 2,195 feet per second.
12 minutes after launch, Apollo 11 was already in near circular Earth orbit for about 100 nautical miles up. After about 1.5 orbits, the SIVB stage fired again for the translunar injection burn, sending the spacecraft towards the moon. About a half an hour later, Michael Collins piloted the transportation and docking maneuver, separating the command module Columbia, turning it around and docking it with the lunar module Eagle still attached to the upper stage. The LM was then extracted, and the rocket stage was sent on a separate trajectory that later slingshotted past the moon and into orbit around the sun. On July 19th, Apollo 11 passed behind the moon and fired its engine to enter lunar orbit. Over the next 30 orbits, the crew surveyed potential landing zones in the Sea of Tranquility, chosen for its smooth terrain and prior robotic mapping technology for missions like Ranger 8 and Survey 5. On July 20th, Armstrong and Aldrin entered Eagle and prepared for descent. After separating from Collins and Columbia, Armstrong famously noted, "The Eagle has wings." However, things quickly became complicated. The spacecraft was arriving faster than planned and slightly off course, possibly due to gravitational irregularities or early maneuvering effects. About 5 minutes into descent, the onboard guidance computer began throwing 1201 and 1202 alarms, indicating that it was overloaded. NASA controllers quickly confirmed it was safe to continue. The issue was later traced to the rendezvous radar feeding extra data into the system due to a hardware quirk, forcing the computer to prioritize critical tasks rather than abort the mission entirely. As Armstrong took manual control, he saw the planned landing area was too rough and cratered. With fuel running low and dust starting to obscure visibility, he steered toward a smoother region. At around 100 feet above the surface, only seconds of fuel remained. Finally, a probe on one of the landing legs made contact, and a few seconds later, Eagle touched down safely in the Sea of Tranquility. Hours later, after delays inside the cramped lunar module, Armstrong opened the hatch and began descending the ladder. Millions on Earth watched via live broadcast that reached roughly 600 million viewers worldwide. Gee whiz, that is a lot of viewers. Man, if I only had that many viewers on my channel.
Tell me when I hit the bottom step and the bottom step. I'm on it. Yep. Oh, okay. Look at this DLR cube. Yes. Okay.
During their time on the moon, the astronauts planted the U.S. flag with some difficulties in the hard soil, conducted scientific experiments including seismic and laser relativity studies, then spent the rest of their limited time documenting the surface, photographing the terrain, and gathering geographical material. Despite time constraints and equipment challenges, they successfully completed the mission's scientific objectives, ultimately returning with multiple types of lunar rocks, including basalt and breccia, and samples that would later help identify new minerals not previously known on Earth. And before any conspiracy theorists say, "Oh, the moon landing was totally faked," in the comments, make sure to remember what happened to the last moon landing was fake guy. Oh yes, I remember. Buzz Aldrin punched him straight in the face.
You're the one who said you walked on the moon when you didn't. Calling the kettle black, if I ever thought of it. Saying I misrepresented myself. Away from me. You're a coward and a liar and a thief.
The grand conclusion. Ever since I started studying American history almost a decade ago, I have always had one question.
Why haven't we been back up to the moon since 1972?
Class dismissed. I got to go wax my emu.
Hey, what's wrong with the teacher? It's almost like she ran out of here to avoid discussing the moon landing. I guess she's been watching too many Monsieur Z videos or something. Anyone would have that reaction.
Yep, that's got to be it.
Indeed.
As it turns out, the answer to my question has nothing to do with the endless conspiracy theories or government cover-up. The answer is actually quite simple. Budget constraints and a lack of political interest. After the space race is over, the US government felt there was no longer a need to keep going to the moon. As I mentioned earlier, it isn't that crazy to imagine. I mean, the whole reason why the US government was even interested in space exploration in the first place was due to the political tension with the Soviet Union and the panic that engulfed the US after the Sputnik satellite was launched. Had there been no Cold War, we likely wouldn't have given space a second thought. Or maybe we would have, but we would have done it much later. Who knows? But one thing that we do know is that the US government has become interested in both space exploration and the moon once again with the Artemis program. And it won't be long before Artemis 4 is launched, and once it's launched, the Americans will once again walk on the moon.
He was over 2 axe handles tall, he was arrow straight and thin. He was rough and he was tougher than a gnarled old hickory limb. In the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson got that name. His soldiers gave it to him, forever to remain. Andrew Jackson was a soldier, about as soft as old cement. When he had a thing or two to say, folks knew just what he meant. Lots of big men tried to break him, but never was he bent. Old Hickory Andrew Jackson, our 7th president.